Something I try to do, and really always did, was challenge myself on watching horror movies that I just knew were designed to mess me up. Some of these were pretty obvious, like watching the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre by myself after I walked to the local video store and rented that and Creepshow. Shout out to Video Unlimited for renting those flicks to a 12-year-old, by the way. Others could be in-your-face rough, like a Serbian film, or horror-adjacent, like Salò. One that I knew very little about was a foreign title called Funny Games, so I added it to my Netflix physical disc queue and waited for it to arrive. It was anything but funny and messed with me like few before or after have. Austria and Germany are very different in terms of their horror output. We've discussed in the past how underrated and prolific German horror has been, ranging from the films of the silent era all the way to modern classics, but Austria has far fewer to look at. Well, to be clear, Austria does follow a similar pattern, but their movies are just less well known. Starting off at the same time as their ever talked about German expressionism films, we have The Lady in the Black Gloves from 1919, Labyrinth of Horror from 1921, and The Grinning Face, also from 1921. The Grinning Face is the most interesting of these, as it was adapted from the story The Man Who Laughs that would also later get adapted again in 1928 with the more famous portrayal by Conrad Veidt. This would also play into pop culture in the following century, with some of the best Joker storylines taking inspiration from that book and its films. 1924 would give us the most famous Austrian horror movie from this time, with another great Conrad Veidt performance in The Hands of Orlok. The film follows a concert pianist who loses his hands in a terrible accident and has his hands replaced with the transplanted hands of a recently executed murderer. That's a lot of hands. He's unable to play the piano anymore, and strange occurrences happen dealing with murder and conspiracy. It was remade a few times as Mad Love from 1935 with Peter Lorre, and then again in 1960 and 1962. Friend of the channel, Eric Red, even has quite a few nods to it in his Best Movie You Never Saw, Body Parts. While there are a few more entries here and there, the industry as a whole would take nearly half a century break. Moving to 1975, we'd get an experimental entry into the anthology horror category with Parapsycho, Spectrum of Fear. It follows specific themes in its 3 chapters and was both lauded and hated for its use of footage from an actual autopsy in the course of its runtime. A little less than a decade later, we'd get one of the most famous Austrian horror entries with Angst. Angst follows the exploits of a serial killer that has been released from prison, only to immediately go on another killing spree. There's no compassion or method for this killer, only to kill and feed off the fear of his victims. It's very distressing and a tough watch, and I would liken it to Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer in tone, if not execution. No pun intended, I promise. Gaspar Noé often cites this film as one of his biggest inspirations for his own career. Aside from a smattering of entries here and there, it would be quiet until award-winning filmmaker Michael Haneke would show us some truly frightening things with his 4th feature, Funny Games. Funny Games opens with the Schober family on the way to a lakefront property while listening to a beautiful classical composition before the audience hears some crushing death metal, something that does a great job subverting expectations of the serene opening. The family consists of the father George, mother Anna, and son Georgie, with a large family dog named Rolf. Shortly after they get settled in, they are greeted by the neighbor Fred, who brings with him a stranger named Paul. George and Georgie get the boat started while a second strange man from next door named Peter asks Anna for supplies. He's super awkward and ends up breaking several eggs, the ones he wanted to borrow, and doesn't leave when the obvious time comes while also being rude in his requests. He's wearing white gloves, something that is way more suspicious than Anna thinks it is, and proceeds to drop the phone in the water-filled sink. Peter goes to leave but is stopped by the family dog and is now joined by Paul. Paul also has white gloves and borrows one of George's golf clubs to try out. George and Georgie hear Rolfie barking before it abruptly stops, and they head back to the house. Paul refers to Peter as Tom, something that adds to Anna's confusion, and the pair won't leave, even when asked nicely. He turns the hostility back on Anna, and George comes to the door, and the strangers won't leave or even allow themselves to be kicked out. They still won't leave and then attack George with one of his own golf clubs. The tonal shift here from tension to terror is wonderful and lets the audience know that nothing is safe. Paul explains that he has killed the dog, but sends Anna on a game to search for the remains anyway. It's here that the movie takes another interesting and decisive turn where Paul turns around and winks at the camera, clearly letting us in on the game whether we want to or not. The kidnapped family avoids getting another set of neighbors caught, and the two sadistic strangers torture the family both emotionally and physically. The two men change names often, with Tom and Jerry being used in addition to Peter and Paul, and even Beavis and Butthead. They bet that the family won't last until 9 in the morning, and then the games become more frightening. The assailants constantly break the fourth wall, and it creates a lack of control for both the audience and the family. They put a sack over the son's head and have Anna begin to undress while George is forced to watch and finally ask her to comply. Georgie escapes after soiling himself and makes it over to the neighbor's house to seek help. Unfortunately, it's the neighbors we saw the two men with earlier, and he only finds a dead body. Georgie is unsuccessful in his attempt to hide and tries to kill Paul with an unloaded shotgun. He and the gun are brought back to the house anyway. The now loaded shotgun is used in a game of essentially eeny meeny miny mo, and Paul goes into the kitchen to make food. We don't see what happens, but a gunshot is heard, and the aftermath is blood all over the TV with poor George's body crumpled on the ground in the corner. The parents are devastated, and Peter and Paul get bored and decide to leave, feeling that the emotions of the situation are used up and the parents won't be any fun anymore. Anna and George attempt to pull themselves together through the grief and pain and decides that George will try to dry the phone here while Anna makes a break for it. It seems like they may have a chance, but the two villains come back with Anna and tie her up and put her on the couch with George. In the middle of explaining to Anna how she and her husband may die and in what order, she's able to grab the gun and blast Peter into the wall. Paul is angry but looking for the remote, and when he finds it, we get another indignity. He rewinds time and undoes her little amount of progress. This results in George getting shot where he lays while they take Anna out on the lake. She's pushed over the side while tied up to drown as the two men casually talk before getting to another house and starting another round. One of the best, and most frustrating parts, is the way the leader of the two men breaks the fourth wall. Sometimes it's as simple as him winking or looking at the camera. Other times it's with him asking a question directly to us. Finally, it all culminates in the reversal scene. We as the audience have been dragged through all the turmoil along with the family, and of course we're rooting for them to survive. When a mentally, emotionally, and physically exhausted Anna grabs the gun and kills Peter, we think that the tides have finally turned. Even though their son will never come back, they were able to get some modicum of vengeance. Then we are angered more as this is undone by a remote control for a TV. It's all a game, a funny, funny game. The other best bit is just the overall tension and brutality. The tension runs throughout the entire film, even when you just see the two men at the neighbor's home, and really never stops until the movie's over. The brutality is often sudden or even off-screen, which plays perfectly into things sometimes being worse when you can't see them. Finally, the movie goes along pretty normally along the lines of normal thrillers until Georgie is killed. Kids aren't supposed to die in movies, and this one, in front of his parents, is particularly brutal and heartbreaking. The two main villains are played by Frank Gearing and Arno Frisch, and they've mostly stayed with European productions, with Arno also appearing as the titular Benny in Benny's video from the Funny Games director. Suzanne Lothar, who plays Anna, passed away in 2012, but in addition to appearing in a ton of Austrian television shows, she also appeared in larger international productions like Joe Wright's Anna Karenina and Oscar favorite The Reader. She would also frequently appear with her on-screen husband from Funny Games and show up in a few other efforts from director Michael Haneke. Ulrich Mew was the one actor I actually recognized from this cast. He was brilliant in the Oscar-winning Best Foreign Film The Lives of Others, which also sits in the top 60 of IMDb's top 250, for what that's worth. He would frequently work with Suzanne Lothar and also appear in Haneke's first movie, Benny's Video. Director Haneke is an Oscar-nominated and Palme d'Or winning writer and director who makes, well, let's say challenging films. His first effort, The Seventh Continent, follows a family getting rid of all of their possessions followed by committing suicide together. Benny's Video, as we mentioned before, is about a young boy who films his experiments with violence, including the murder of another child, which he films. He would follow that with today's entry and also have a few more thrillers before remaking his own film in 2007. He would only have 3 other films to date, but 2012's Amour would be considered his masterpiece. Hopefully, the 80-year-old director has something left in the tank to thrill and terrify us just one more time. The movie was derided in its own country as an American slasher ripoff, but it did well in other territories, and its sudden brutality as well as off-screen violence were seen as unique and thrilling. The film continues to be discussed as a 90s gem, and it would eventually be remade in the US starring Naomi Watts, Tim Roth, and Michael Pitt. Unlike most remakes, the film would actually be helmed by the original's director, something we also saw with our entry on Ju-on. That film is nearly shot-for-shot remake, but works in a way that Psycho never could. Funny Games is a hard watch, but a necessary one. It absolutely earns its spot as one of the best foreign horrors. Well, that's all for JoBlo Horror Originals Best Foreign Horror. Thanks for watching all the episodes and, well, putting up with all my mispronunciations of actors' and directors' names. I appreciated all your guys' support. Thank you for watching our show. If you like what you see, please subscribe to our JoBlo Horror Videos channel. Tell your friends who like this sort of content, and turn on that bell to receive notifications for all the latest videos. We're an independent company, and we appreciate all of your support.